My beloved child, something has shifted quietly behind the scenes, and the person who once believed they could keep the truth hidden is beginning to realize that silence may no longer protect them. Your soulmate has reached a decision they avoided for longer than anyone around them expected, and the third party can feel it. Not because voices were raised. Not because a dramatic confrontation took place. But because one simple sentence changed the atmosphere completely. I'm going to tell them what really happened. Those words carried more weight than an argument ever could. And what makes this moment so important is that the secret is not what you may first imagine. The death surrounding this story is not about a person or anything disturbing. It is about the death of something you once valued deeply, the trust you carried, the closeness you believed was genuine, the peaceful connection that slowly disappeared without giving you a clear reason why. For a long time, you may have wondered why something that once felt natural suddenly became complicated. Why conversations changed. Why warmth became hesitation. Why certain moments felt as though someone else had entered the story without ever standing directly in front of you. You noticed the difference, even when nobody explained it. And perhaps that was the hardest part. You were left trying to understand an ending without being shown the pages that caused it. But somewhere else, your soulmate was beginning to put those pages together. At first, they did not want to believe what they were seeing. Small details had started connecting in uncomfortable ways. A conversation remembered differently. A message described inaccurately. A moment when your intentions had been explained to them by someone else instead of coming directly from you. None of these things seemed enormous on their own. Yet when your soulmate finally placed them beside one another, the pattern became difficult to ignore. Someone had repeatedly influenced how they interpreted you. Not through some unbelievable scheme, but through something far more ordinary and therefore much easier to miss: half-truths, assumptions, carefully chosen words, and quiet suggestions delivered at exactly the moments when your soulmate felt uncertain. That realization did not create anger first. It created silence. The kind of silence that comes when a person suddenly understands that several decisions they believed were entirely their own may have been shaped by information they never properly questioned. Don't skip, because the next part of this realization is what changed your soulmate's decision completely. They remembered one moment involving you that never made sense. You had responded to something with distance, and they had been told that your distance meant you no longer cared. At the time, your soulmate accepted that explanation because it matched the fear they were already carrying. But recently, another detail surfaced. You had not withdrawn because you stopped caring. You had withdrawn because you believed they had already chosen to leave you behind. Two people were reacting to completely different versions of the same situation. And standing between those versions was the third party. That is where the panic began, not dramatic panic, not chaos, but the quiet uneasiness of someone realizing that questions are finally being asked. Your soulmate started returning to old conversations with a different mind. They began noticing which explanations came directly from you and which ones had been delivered through someone else. They began remembering how often the third party seemed strangely certain about what you supposedly felt, wanted, or intended. And then came one question that changed everything: how could you know that if they never told you? The room went still. There was no immediate answer. Only hesitation. And sometimes hesitation reveals more than a long explanation ever could. Your soulmate did not push. They did something far more powerful. They watched. They listened. They waited to see whether the story would remain consistent. It did not. One detail changed. Then another. Something that had once been described as definite suddenly became probably. Something previously presented as your exact words became what I thought you meant. And slowly, your soulmate understood that the secret they were uncovering was not one enormous event hidden in darkness. It was a collection of smaller choices that had gradually damaged the trust between you until the connection nearly became unrecognizable. That is what the third party may be responsible for: the ending of an earlier version of your bond, the death of the easy trust you once shared before doubt was allowed to grow between you. Yet here is the unexpected part. Your soulmate does not want revenge. They do not want a dramatic scene. They want clarity. And that decision is exactly why the third party is unsettled. Because clarity does not need shouting. Clarity simply asks the question everyone hoped would never be asked: what actually happened? Stay till the end, because your soulmate's next discovery was not about the third party at all. It was about you. While revisiting everything, they remembered the way you behaved when the connection became difficult. You did not expose anyone. You did not chase every rumor. You did not force yourself into places where you felt unwanted. You stepped back, even though stepping back hurt. At the time, your soulmate may have misunderstood that silence. Now they are beginning to see it differently. Perhaps your quietness was not indifference. Perhaps it was dignity. Perhaps you were waiting for them to recognize something you could not prove without turning the entire situation into a battle. That thought stayed with them longer than expected. And late in a quiet moment, your soulmate admitted something they had resisted admitting before: maybe I never gave them the chance to tell me their side. Notice how different that is from everything you may have imagined. This is not somebody suddenly becoming perfect. This is a person beginning to take responsibility for what they believed without checking it. That matters. Because the truth your soulmate is preparing to reveal is not only about what the third party did. It is also about what your soulmate allowed. They trusted another person's interpretation more than their own direct experience with you. They let uncertainty become distance. They mistook confusion for evidence. And now they understand that repairing anything between you cannot begin with pretending none of that happened. Something important is waiting for you in this realization: sometimes the greatest secret is not a hidden event. Sometimes it is the hidden reason behind a change you spent months trying to understand. Your soulmate now believes the third party played a meaningful role in weakening the trust between you, but they also know that blaming someone else entirely would be too easy. They are preparing to tell you something much more vulnerable: I should have asked you. Those 5 words may carry more meaning than 100 dramatic declarations. Because beneath them is an admission that your voice should have mattered more. Your truth should have been heard directly. Your intentions should never have been translated through somebody else. And this is where the story begins turning in a direction even the third party did not expect. When your soulmate first decided to reveal the secret, the third party tried to make the conversation seem unnecessary. Why bring up the past, they asked. It sounded reasonable on the surface. But your soulmate heard something different beneath it. If the past truly meant nothing, why was there so much concern about discussing it? That question remained unanswered. Then came another unexpected moment. The third party said, "You're going to ruin everything over something that happened a long time ago." Your soulmate paused. Not because those words changed their mind, but because of one word, ruin. They had never said they wanted to ruin anything. They had only said they wanted to tell you the truth. So why did truth sound like destruction to someone else? That single detail settled something inside them. For the first time, your soulmate stopped negotiating with their own doubt. They realized that whatever happened next, honesty had to be part of it. And the secret they are preparing to reveal is becoming clearer. There was a moment in the past when the third party had information that could have prevented a major misunderstanding between you. They knew something your soulmate did not know. They knew your silence had a reason. They knew your distance was not rejection. They knew you had interpreted events differently. And yet, instead of helping both sides understand one another, they allowed the misunderstanding to remain. Why? That is the piece your soulmate still does not fully understand. Jealousy would be the easiest explanation, but they are not willing to assume. Control might explain part of it, but again, they want facts rather than guesses. What they do know is that the third party had an opportunity to protect the truth and chose silence instead. And in that silence, trust between you slowly disappeared. Your soulmate remembers the exact moment now. A conversation. A question about you. The third party could have clarified everything with one sentence, yet they answered in a way that made your soulmate believe you had moved on emotionally. Your soulmate carried that belief forward. Their behavior changed because of it. Your behavior changed in response. Neither of you understood what the other was reacting to. And the connection began collapsing under a misunderstanding neither of you had intentionally created. This is why the third party feels exposed now. Your soulmate has finally discovered that the story they were given did not match what actually happened. But there is still another layer. A layer your soulmate has not told anyone yet. They found something small, almost forgettable that supports what you had silently been trying to communicate all along. Not a dramatic document. Not anything invasive. Something simple. Something connected to a moment they once completely misunderstood. When they saw it again, the entire memory changed. Suddenly your reaction made sense. Your silence made sense. Even the timing made sense. And your soulmate sat there realizing that you may have been carrying the consequences of someone else's version of events while never knowing exactly what had been said about you. That realization softened them. It also humbled them. Because now the conversation they want with you is no longer simply, "Here is what the third party did." It has become, "Here is what I finally understand." And those are two very different conversations. One creates blame. The other creates possibility. Your soulmate is choosing possibility. They want to explain why they pulled away, what they believed at the time, what they recently discovered, and why they now regret allowing another voice to become louder than the connection they had directly experienced with you. Yet before they can do that, one final question remains unanswered. The third party knows exactly which detail your soulmate has uncovered, and they seem especially concerned about one specific part of the story becoming known. It is not the part your soulmate expected. It goes back to the very beginning, before the misunderstanding grew, before the distance, before either of you realized anything was being shaped around you. There was one conversation your soulmate never knew happened. A conversation involving your name, a choice, and a message that was supposed to reach them but somehow never did. Your soulmate has now learned that the message existed. What they do not yet know is why it was never passed on. And when they finally asked the third party that question, the answer did not come. Only a long pause, followed by a sentence your soulmate is still trying to understand. The sentence was so quiet that your soulmate almost missed what it revealed. I thought keeping that message from you would make things easier. Nothing dramatic followed. No raised voices. No sudden confrontation. Just silence, and the slow realization that something once presented as an innocent misunderstanding had actually involved a choice. Your soulmate looked at the third party differently after that. Not with hatred. Not even with anger at first. More with disbelief. Because there is a difference between misunderstanding a situation and deciding that someone else does not need to know something important. That distinction changed everything. The message itself had been simple. It was not a grand confession. It was not anything impossible or exaggerated. It was something from you that would have explained why you had suddenly become quieter. You had wanted your soulmate to understand that you were stepping back because you felt confused, not because your feelings had disappeared. You wanted space for clarity, not permanent distance. Somehow, that meaning never reached them. Instead, your soulmate had been told something very different: that you were finished, that you no longer cared enough to explain yourself, that trying to reach you would only make things worse. And because your soulmate was already afraid of rejection, they believed it. Don't skip, because what happened after that belief settled in is the reason so much of the past suddenly looks different now. Your soulmate stopped trying. Not because they stopped caring, but because they thought respecting your wishes meant leaving you alone. You saw their silence and believed it confirmed your worst suspicion that they had chosen someone else, that they could move forward without you, that perhaps the connection had mattered more to you than it ever did to them. Both of you stood on opposite sides of the same misunderstanding, each waiting for a sign from the other, while the third party quietly watched the distance grow. That is the part your soulmate is struggling to accept. They keep replaying one particular week in their mind. They remember almost reaching out to you several times. They remember opening a conversation, typing something, deleting it, then convincing themselves that silence was what you wanted. And somewhere during that same period, you may have been asking yourself why they had suddenly disappeared. There is something painfully human about that, my beloved child. Two people can care deeply and still become separated by assumptions neither of them knows how to challenge. Yet this story did not end there. The third party eventually became someone your soulmate trusted for explanations. Whenever your behavior seemed confusing, your soulmate asked them what they thought. Whenever your name surfaced, they had an interpretation ready. At first, those interpretations sounded supportive. Maybe give them space. Maybe they have moved on. Maybe you should protect yourself. Nothing about those words seemed obviously harmful. That is why your soulmate never questioned them. But now, knowing that the original message had been withheld, every later suggestion carries a different weight. Were those comments genuine advice, or were they helping maintain a misunderstanding that should never have existed in the first place? Your soulmate still does not know the full answer. And rather than creating a story from suspicion, they have decided to ask directly. That decision is what has unsettled the third party most. Because your soulmate is no longer asking, "What do you think happened?" They are asking, "What did you actually know?" Those questions sound similar, but they are not. One invites interpretation. The other demands memory. The first answer came quickly. The second one did not. Your soulmate asked, "When did you first realize that I had misunderstood them?" The third party stared down for a moment and said, "I don't remember." Your soulmate let the silence remain. Then they asked something even simpler, "Did you ever know they still cared?" Another pause. And this time the response was, "I had a feeling." Something shifted inside your soulmate when they heard that. A feeling. Those words meant the certainty with which the third party had once claimed that you had moved on had never actually been certainty at all. They had been guessing. Worse, they had presented the guess as though it were something reliable. Your soulmate suddenly remembered every decision they had made based on that supposed certainty. The nights they stopped themselves from reaching out. The opportunities they allowed to pass. The emotional walls they built because they believed you wanted them gone. Stay till the end, because the next realization is quieter, but it matters even more. Your soulmate is not only discovering what the third party did. They are discovering how easily fear made them accept someone else's version of you. They admitted this privately, "I believed what matched what I was afraid of." That insight changed the tone of everything. Because now they understand that the third party did not create every problem alone. They may have influenced the story, withheld context, and allowed confusion to continue, but your soulmate also recognizes their own responsibility. They could have asked you directly. They could have trusted their own memories of you. They could have paused before turning uncertainty into a conclusion. That self-awareness is why the truth they want to reveal feels different from revenge. They do not want to arrive before you pointing fingers. They want to arrive with honesty. They want to say, "I finally understand how we got here, and I should have seen it sooner." But there is one detail they have not yet understood. Why would the third party want the misunderstanding to continue? That question has followed your soulmate everywhere. And then, almost unexpectedly, an old memory returned. Months earlier, before the distance between you became obvious, the third party had asked your soulmate a strange question: "If you had to choose between peace and this connection, what would you choose?" At the time, your soulmate thought it was philosophical. They laughed it off. They answered, "Why would I have to choose?" The third party had smiled and changed the subject. Now your soulmate remembers that moment differently. Was the third party already uncomfortable with how much you mattered? Did they believe your connection threatened their place in your soulmate's life? Or were they genuinely convinced they were protecting your soulmate from something? The answer may not be as simple as jealousy. In fact, something your soulmate discovered suggests the third party may have believed they were doing the right thing. And that is where the story becomes more complicated. Apparently, the third party had misunderstood you too. They had witnessed one moment from the outside and interpreted it incorrectly. They saw you leave a conversation abruptly. They believed you were dismissing your soulmate. What they did not know was what happened moments before that. You had received information that made you think your soulmate had already chosen a different path. Your reaction was not coldness. It was self-protection. But the third party saw only the ending of the scene, not what caused it. From that incomplete moment, they built an entire judgment about you. Then every later event was filtered through that judgment. When you were quiet, it became proof that you did not care. When you gave space, it became proof you were leaving. When you hesitated, it became proof that your intentions were uncertain. Your soulmate now realizes something important. Once someone decides who they think you are, they can accidentally make every action fit that story. And that may be exactly what happened. The third party believed they were protecting your soulmate from disappointment, so they withheld the message. They believed they were preventing another painful cycle, so they encouraged distance. But what began as misguided protection slowly became control. Because once they realized your soulmate still cared, admitting the truth would have meant admitting that their earlier judgment might have been wrong. So instead of correcting the story, they defended it. That is the secret your soulmate is finally preparing to reveal. The third party was not responsible for the death of something physical. They were responsible for helping destroy the trust and communication that once gave your connection life. Yet even that description feels incomplete to your soulmate, because now they see another truth. Something that was damaged is not necessarily something that can never be understood again. And that realization has brought an unexpected calm. Your soulmate no longer feels trapped inside the past. For the first time, they can separate what actually happened from what they were told happened. They are rediscovering memories they had buried beneath someone else's interpretation. One memory in particular has stayed with them. You once looked at them during a difficult moment and said something simple, something they dismissed at the time because they were too confused to understand it fully. You told them, "I wish you would ask me instead of assuming." That sentence has returned now with remarkable clarity. Your soulmate remembers your expression. Not angry. Tired. Almost resigned. At the time, they thought you were avoiding responsibility. Now they realize you may have been asking for the one thing neither of you knew how to give each other then: direct communication. Something important is waiting for you here. Your soulmate has begun to understand that the greatest loss was not the relationship itself. It was the habit of trusting assumptions more than conversation. That habit is what died slowly between you. And if anything meaningful is ever to grow again, it cannot be built on the same foundation. Your soulmate knows that. That is why they are preparing differently. They are not planning some dramatic arrival. They are writing down what they need to say because they are afraid emotion may make them forget. The first line they wrote was not romantic. It was honest: "I owe you the truth." The second line came more slowly: "I believe things about you without asking if they were true." Then they stopped. They stared at those words for a long time. Because admitting that means admitting how much unnecessary distance may have been created. It means acknowledging that you may have suffered from decisions based on a version of events you never even knew existed. Your soulmate almost stopped there. Part of them wondered whether telling you now would only reopen something that had finally become quiet. But another thought came stronger: you deserve to know why the connection changed. Not because you need the past returned to you, but because unanswered questions can follow a person far longer than the event itself. Your soulmate wants to remove at least one question from your heart. They want you to know that your silence was misunderstood. Your intentions were misread. And their distance was not proof that you meant nothing to them. It was the behavior of someone who believed they were respecting a decision you had never actually made. That realization has been difficult for them to carry. But the most surprising development happened when the third party finally stopped defending themselves. After several conversations, after changing explanations and trying to minimize what happened, they said something your soulmate never expected: "I knew you still loved them. That's why I was afraid." Your soulmate did not immediately understand. "Afraid of what?" they asked. The answer came softly: that if you talked to them directly, you wouldn't need me to explain anything anymore. There it was. Not a grand conspiracy. Not something unbelievable. Something deeply human. The fear of losing influence. The fear of becoming less important. The fear that two people understanding each other would leave no room for someone else to stand between them. Your soulmate felt something soften when they heard that confession. It did not excuse what happened. But it explained more than anger ever could. The third party had become emotionally invested in being needed. Every time your soulmate came to them confused about you, they felt important. Every time they offered an interpretation, they became part of the connection. And without fully realizing how far it had gone, they began protecting that position. That is why your soulmate's decision to speak directly with you feels so threatening now. Because the moment you and your soulmate speak without an interpreter, the entire structure disappears. There is no longer a need for someone else to decide what you mean. And your soulmate has finally recognized that. Still, the third party's confession was not the final secret. There is one more detail. One that changes the meaning of the original message they withheld. Your soulmate believed the message was simply you asking for space. But when they finally saw the full version, there was another sentence attached to it. A sentence the third party never mentioned. Your soulmate read it once. Then again. Then they sat completely still, because those words proved that even during the moment you stepped away, you had left the door open for one thing. Not an automatic reunion. Not a promise. Something more grounded. A conversation. You had written that if your soulmate ever wanted the truth directly from you, you would tell them. That invitation had existed all along. Your soulmate had simply never known. And now, after everything, they are preparing to accept an invitation they received far too late. They have decided they will tell you what happened, what they believed, what was hidden from them, and what they now understand about their own mistakes. But just before they reached out, they discovered something else in the conversation history: one short response sent after your original message, a response they never wrote, never saw, and never authorized. And the moment your soulmate read those words, they finally understood why you stopped waiting. The response was only 7 words long, but it had changed the direction of everything. Please don't contact me about this again. Your soulmate stared at it because they knew immediately that something was wrong. They had never written those words. They had never asked anyone to send them. And yet the message appeared beneath your original note as though it had come directly from them. Suddenly, your silence after that moment was no longer mysterious. You had not simply disappeared. You had believed you had been given an answer. A clear one. A final one. And because you respected what you thought was their decision, you stepped away. Your soulmate felt the entire past rearrange itself in a matter of seconds. Every time they had wondered why you never tried again, there had been an answer hiding in plain sight. You thought they had told you not to. Every time they believed your distance proved you had moved on, you may have been carrying the exact opposite understanding that they had closed the door first. And now the question was no longer whether the third party had influenced the connection. The question was how far that influence had actually gone. Don't skip, because what your soulmate discovered next is the reason the third party could no longer pretend this was only a harmless misunderstanding. Your soulmate asked one simple question: who sent this? At first, the third party avoided answering. They talked about how emotional everyone had been at the time. They said things were confusing. They said they were trying to prevent more hurt. But your soulmate kept returning to the same point. Who sent it? Eventually, the answer came quietly. I did. No dramatic reaction followed. Your soulmate simply sat there, absorbing the weight of those 2 words. The third party had not only misunderstood you. They had not only withheld context. They had responded on your soulmate's behalf. They had made a decision that belonged to 2 other people. And in that moment, your soulmate understood exactly what had been lost. It was not merely a conversation. It was the possibility of choosing freely. You were denied the chance to hear your soulmate's actual thoughts, and your soulmate was denied the chance to hear your response. One borrowed sentence had stood between 2 people and pretended to be truth. Yet even now, your soulmate did not want the story to become about punishment. Something inside them was becoming calmer, not louder. Because the deeper they went into the truth, the more clearly they saw that anger would not repair what confusion had damaged. What mattered now was restoring reality. They needed you to know that those 7 words were never theirs. They needed you to understand that the door you believed had been closed was never deliberately closed by them. And perhaps most difficult of all, they needed to admit that they had trusted the wrong system entirely. They had allowed another person too much access to something that should have remained private, direct, and honest. Stay till the end, because your soulmate's next decision surprised even them. Instead of reaching out immediately, they paused. Not because they changed their mind. Because they finally understood that truth carries responsibility. They could not simply appear in your life with a shocking explanation and expect everything to return to the way it once was. You had lived with the consequences too. You may have rebuilt your peace around what you believed happened. You may have stopped asking questions because unanswered questions eventually become exhausting. So your soulmate began thinking less about what they wanted to say and more about what you might need to hear. That changed the entire message they were preparing. The first version had been full of explanation. Dates. Details. Who said what? When things happened. But they deleted most of it. They realized that overwhelming you with every detail would make the truth feel like another burden. Instead, they reduced everything to its emotional center. There is something you were led to believe came from me. It didn't. I recently learned what happened, and I'm sorry I didn't protect our communication better. They read those words several times. Still, they did not send them. One part felt unfinished. The apology. I'm sorry I didn't protect our communication better. Your soulmate knew that was true, but not complete. They had done more than fail to protect it. They had ignored their own instincts. There were moments when something about the third party's explanations did not feel right, yet your soulmate accepted them because asking deeper questions felt difficult. And now they were learning a painful but meaningful lesson: avoiding discomfort rarely creates clarity. It usually postpones it. So they added another line. I should have asked you directly instead of believing what was easier for me to believe. That sentence was harder to write. It placed responsibility exactly where it belonged. Not entirely on the third party. Not entirely on circumstance. On your soulmate too. And strangely, that honesty gave them peace. They were no longer trying to control how you might react. They were simply trying to make sure that if they finally spoke, they would speak without excuses. Something important is waiting for you in this moment, because there is another reason your soulmate hesitated before sending anything. They realized they were still carrying one assumption about you. They assumed you had been waiting for this explanation. But what if you had moved forward? What if your life had changed? What if receiving the truth now brought relief but not reunion? Your soulmate had to face that possibility honestly. And for the first time, they accepted it. They don't owe me the ending I want just because I finally learned the truth. That thought became the most mature part of their transformation. Because revealing the secret was no longer a strategy to get you back. It became an act of respect. You deserved accurate information about something that had affected your choices. What you did with that truth would be yours. The third party noticed this change and became even more unsettled by it. They had expected your soulmate to become emotional, perhaps impulsive, perhaps determined to undo everything immediately. Instead, your soulmate became clearer. And clarity made them harder to influence. When the third party asked, "What are you going to tell them?" your soulmate replied, "Only what I know is true." That answer mattered. No speculation. No assumptions about motives. No exaggeration. They would tell you that the original message had been withheld. They would tell you that a response had been sent without their permission. They would tell you they had believed false impressions about your intentions. And they would tell you they regretted not coming directly to you. Nothing more. Nothing that could not be owned. The third party then said something unexpected: "If you tell them everything, they'll hate me." Your soulmate looked at them and answered softly, "I'm not telling them so they can hate you." That response changed the atmosphere. Because suddenly the third party understood this was not revenge. Your soulmate was not trying to destroy anyone's reputation. They were trying to stop a false story from continuing. And perhaps that frightened the third party even more, because there was nothing dramatic to fight against. Truth stated calmly leaves very little room for distraction. For the first time, the third party began speaking without defending every choice. They admitted that back then, they had become convinced you were going to hurt your soulmate emotionally. They believed your uncertainty meant you were unreliable. They believed stopping communication would force your soulmate to move forward. At first, they told themselves it was temporary. One message. One intervention. One moment of interference. But once the consequences began unfolding, they became afraid to admit what they had done. If they confessed after a week, your soulmate would ask why they had waited a week. If they confessed after a month, they would have to explain the month. So each passing day made honesty feel harder. Eventually, protecting the secret became more important than correcting the mistake. And that is how small decisions become large consequences, not because someone planned a disaster from the beginning, but because fear makes them keep defending something they should have admitted sooner. Your soulmate listened without interrupting. Then they asked the question that had been sitting quietly beneath everything: did they ever know you sent that reply? The third party shook their head. No, that answer hit differently. You had spent all this time believing your soulmate had deliberately pushed you away. Your soulmate had spent all this time believing you had deliberately chosen not to return. Neither story was true. Two people had been carrying emotional consequences from words neither of them had actually chosen. Your soulmate felt the weight of that, but they also felt something unexpected: relief. Because uncertainty had finally become understandable. The past was painful, yes, but no longer impossible to explain. There was a timeline. There were decisions. There were misunderstandings. And there was finally enough truth to stop wondering whether the connection had simply meant nothing. It had meant something. Perhaps that was exactly why confusion around it had mattered so much. The third party then offered to contact you themselves and explain everything. Your soulmate immediately said no. Not harshly. Firmly. They've heard enough through other people. Those words marked the real turning point. Your soulmate had learned the central lesson. Whatever happened next had to be direct. No messenger. No interpreter. No one deciding what another person meant. If you chose not to respond, they would respect that. If you wanted answers, they would provide them. If you wanted distance, they would finally know that distance came from you, not from someone speaking for you. That distinction had become sacred to them. Then came the moment they had been postponing. Your soulmate opened the message they had drafted. Their finger hovered over it. They read the first line again. There is something you were led to believe came from me. It didn't. They almost pressed send. But one memory stopped them. Your final conversation before everything changed. They remembered something you had said that seemed small then. You had looked tired and told them, "I don't need perfection. I just need honesty." Those words returned now with a force they had not carried before. Your soulmate realized they were about to offer you honesty, but perhaps too carefully. They were still softening some details because they feared how you would see them. So they rewrote the message one final time. I recently learned that a message was kept from me and that a reply was sent to you as though it came from me. I did not write it. I also understand that I failed by not communicating with you directly when things became confusing. I don't know what this changes for you, and I won't assume. But you deserve to know the truth from me. This time, they did not delete anything. This time, they did not ask the third party what they thought. This time, they did not look for reassurance. They simply sat with the truth. And then something strange happened. Before they could send it, their phone lit up with a message from the third party. Your soulmate was only a few steps away from them earlier, so seeing their name appear felt unusual. The message said, "There's one more thing you need to know before you contact them." Your soulmate's stomach tightened, not with fear, but with that familiar feeling that the story had not finished unfolding. They opened the message. The third party explained that the false reply was not the last communication involving you. Weeks after you stepped away, something else had arrived. Something your soulmate had never seen. At first, your soulmate assumed it was another message from you. It was not. It was a message from someone close to you who had noticed how deeply the misunderstanding had affected you. That person had reached out privately, hoping to clarify what happened. They had said you were not angry. You were hurt and confused. They had said you still cared but believed your soulmate wanted distance. And then came the line that made your soulmate stop reading for several seconds. They keep blaming themselves for something they didn't understand. Your soulmate closed their eyes. All this time, while they had been telling themselves you chose to leave, you may have been doing exactly what they were doing, turning confusion inward. Asking what you had done wrong. Wondering whether you had misunderstood everything. Carrying responsibility for a decision made outside both of you. The third party had seen that message too. And they had hidden it. Not because they wanted to hurt you. By then, they were terrified that revealing it would expose the first decision. One secret had created another. Then another. And suddenly they were maintaining a version of reality that became harder to escape from every day. Your soulmate asked, "Why are you telling me now?" The third party replied, "Because if you're finally going to tell them the truth, I don't want you telling half of it." That answer was the first sign that something had changed in them too. The panic was still there, but beneath it was surrender. The exhaustion of carrying a story too long. Your soulmate could sense that this confession was not easy. And while forgiveness was not immediate, understanding began to appear. The third party had made choices that deeply affected the connection, but now they were finally choosing something different. They were choosing to stop hiding. That did not erase what happened. It simply prevented the damage from continuing. And perhaps that is one of the quietest forms of change, when someone realizes they cannot rewrite the past, but they can refuse to keep protecting the lie that grew around it. Your soulmate added the final detail to what they planned to tell you. Then they looked at the entire message and realized something extraordinary. The secret that once seemed capable of destroying everything had actually become the first honest foundation available in a very long time. Not a guarantee. Not a promise of reunion. A foundation. Something real enough to stand on, even if you both eventually chose different directions. Your soulmate pressed send. For several seconds, nothing happened. No immediate response. No sign that you had even seen it. Your soulmate placed the phone down and refused to chase the moment. They had done what they should have done long ago, spoken directly. Minutes passed. Then more. The third party asked whether you had replied. Your soulmate shook their head. And that's okay. Those words surprised them as soon as they said them. Because they meant it. Truth was not a transaction. They were not entitled to an answer simply because they finally became honest. Still, much later, the screen lit up. Your soulmate saw your name. Their heart moved before their hand did. Your response was not long. You did not accuse them. You did not rush toward reconciliation. You wrote one sentence, "I always wondered why those words never sounded like you." Your soulmate read it again and again. Because contained inside that sentence was something they had not expected. Somewhere inside you, even when you accepted the message as real, a small part of you had remembered who they were. Something about the words had never matched the person you knew. You had doubted yourself instead of the message. And now, for the first time, your soulmate understood how close the truth had always been. They replied slowly, "They weren't my words." Your next response came after a long pause. Then whose were they? Your soulmate looked across the room toward the third party. This was the exact moment everyone had feared. The moment the secret would finally be named. But instead of typing immediately, your soulmate asked the third party one last question. "Are you ready for me to tell them everything?" The third party looked frightened, then strangely relieved. And after a silence that seemed to carry the weight of months, they nodded. Your soulmate began typing. Yet just as they were about to send the truth, you sent another message first, one containing a detail neither your soulmate nor the third party knew you had discovered long ago, a detail proving that the story may have had one more person quietly standing at its edge the entire time. If you believe in God, type Amen 222 and subscribe for more videos like this.